All right, hello and welcome everyone. We're just going to give maybe one more minute before we begin today's webinar. All right, well, let's get started. First and foremost, I want to say welcome to today's public webinar brought to you by Switchboard, a one-stop resource hub for newcomer service providers. Today's session is entitled Cultural and Practical Considerations for Working with Ukrainian Clients. And today's session is brought to you in partnership with the Cultural Orientation Resource Exchange, or CORE, as we will refer to them. We are so lucky to have some really wonderful speakers today joining us to talk about this topic, and I'd like to introduce them briefly to you now. First, we have Regan Hill. Regan is the Senior Community Orientation Coordinator for CORE. She supports CORE's various capacity building initiatives, including providing technical assistance to preferred community staff serving Ukrainian newcomers. She has experience working domestically within resettlement agencies, as well as for international nonprofits focused on peace and reconciliation, education, and human rights. Next, we have Oleksandr Kostenko, who is one of the contributors to CORE's Ukrainian refugee backgrounder and has previous experience working as a cultural orientation trainer at the Resettlement Support Center in Eurasia. There, he provided pre-departure in-person and virtual sessions for Ukrainian clients and developed learning materials. He currently resides in Ukraine and works as a learning and development trainer. Next, we're joined by Valentyna Ostapets. She's also one of the contributors to CORE's Ukrainian refugee backgrounder and currently works at World Relief Western Washington as the interim pre-arrival manager. She also has previous experience working as a cultural orientation specialist at World Relief, where she created curriculum and printed materials for cultural orientation. Valentyna came to the US as a refugee from Ukraine and was resettled in 2016. Finally, we're joined by Mariana Kopachevska. She's a case manager for the Ukrainian Response Program of Catholic Charities Community Services. She assists Ukrainian newcomers with social services and connects clients with supportive community networks. Mariana also worked as a teacher and previously volunteered through a community organization in Ukraine serving internally displaced peoples. She speaks English, Ukrainian, and Russian. Here's a quick overview of your settings in Zoom for today. You'll note that this is a Zoom webinar, so you're joining on listen-only mode. You may switch your audio between your computer and phone at any time under audio settings in the lower left corner of your screen. Due to the large number of learners on today's webinar, we've disabled the chat box. However, you do have the option to send messages to the speakers and co-facilitators via the Q&A. Keep an eye on the chat for messages still, however, from Switchboard, as links to various resources will be coming that way as we mention them throughout. Lastly, I'd like to mention that today's session will run for 75 minutes and is being recorded. You'll receive an email with a recording, slides, and recommended resources for further learning within 24 hours of this webinar. The webinar transcript, along with the recording, will also be posted on the Switchboard website within the coming days. Our learning objectives for today are as follows. 1. We'll be summarizing basic cultural and practical considerations for working with Ukrainians through review of content from CORE's Ukrainian backgrounder. 2, we'll identify practical resources for service providers and Ukrainian clients, such as materials from CORE and Settle In. 3, we'll apply insights from discussion with panelists to better support Ukrainians in their resettlement experience. Please note in terms of roadmap and agenda for today, that about 30 minutes of our session today will be covering content that is mostly mirrored in CORE's Ukrainian backgrounder. We'll then have a session of question and answer with our panelists with prepared questions. Finally, once we finish those prepared questions, we'll move on to questions from you all as participants. So we encourage you to continue adding questions to the Q&A box as we proceed. If your question is not being answered, please note that that may be because we are saving it for that last portion of today's session. Those questions that we are able to answer in the Q&A in a written form will appear to you all once they are answered by myself or one of our panelists. Now, before we get rolling with some of our content, we want to get a sense of who is in the room and who is with us. So we're going to be using a live polling platform called Slido. So if you could pull out your smartphone and scan the QR code at the top left of your screen, or go to slido.com and enter the code 3792692, we'd like for you to respond to this question, basically saying, how would you best describe your role? Select all that apply. We can see 10 people have already gotten it to work. Wonderful, happy to hear this and happy to see this. Got a lot of folks who are coming from resettlement agencies and functioning as caseworkers, likely other program coordinators. And if you are someone who feels like they are in other, other does work, but please also try and select one other option that will be helpful in getting an idea of who's in the room in terms of what sector or what space you work in. All right, I'll leave it open for just a couple more seconds, but just wanted to say how helpful information this is for us as we are doing today's session. We'll make sure that we're tailoring it to as many folks as we can and taking a very generalist approach, but do please make sure to use that Q&A if you feel like there are angles or questions or concerns that we're not discussing or have not touched on that are really important for your role. I'm going to move on to one other Slido. This is great practice. We'll be using this a little bit throughout. We have one more Slido here. The next question is, what questions do you have that you hope that we will address in today's webinar? And these can be sort of broad topics, these can be themes, or sort of considerations that you're looking for us to highlight as we go through. Providing resources on trauma-informed care. We've got someone interested in resources for Ukrainian families and school districts, so definitely want to talk about education, emotional support, mental health concerns, housing, everyone's favorite thing to talk about, of course. Trigger words, that has to do a lot with trauma-informed care as well. I see a lot of content about mental health and sort of addressing the social and emotional needs. Grief support materials, employment. You can also see along the top of the screen some of the buzzwords or some of the common topics and themes that are coming out. So we have mental health, we have family strengthening and family systems, got a desire for resources, as well as housing. All right, looks like a lot of you all have questions. So thank you for sharing about these topics and themes that you hope for us to address. You're in luck, we will be covering a great deal of this. But something I do want to encourage is that in addition to today's session, we will be covering a lot of material that is found in CORE's Ukrainian Backgrounder. So we would encourage that you access that, and I'll be dropping a link to that in the chat as well. All right, without further ado, like I said, thank you so much for this. We will be referring to these sorts of items and questions throughout. Please use the Q&A box as we go along, knowing that we will be covering a great deal of things, but please have your questions coming in and we will get to them in the order that we're able to. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our speakers today to talk about our first objective on addressing these basic cultural and practical considerations using content adapted from CORE's Ukrainian Backgrounder. So I'd like to welcome Oleksandr and Valentyna for this next portion.
Good morning and good afternoon to all the participants. It's an honor to be one of the speakers today. And let's talk briefly about history of migration from Ukraine to the US. The first wave in the considered at the end of the 19th century, World War I, and the wave of persecution and repression toward people driven by the national Ukrainian idea, which moved people who were highly educated or political figures to immigrate from Ukrainian territory. This third wave has been a result of World War II. In the fourth wave, we can consider the time of the late 80s, beginning of 90s, of the time of the falling of the USSR till 2021. Most of the immigrants were the Jewish or evangelical Christians who had been prosecuted by the USSR government. And the newest wave has been a result of the Eurasian invasion. Starting on February 24, 2022, Ukrainians moved to different countries to escape the war. In March 2022, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas announced the TPS program for Ukrainians who had been in the US by March 1st. Later time frame has been changed and TPS status can be granted to people who came to the US before April 18. In addition, thousands of Ukrainians were able to cross the border to Mexico and they were granted humanitarian parole status. On April 21, 2022, President Joe Biden announced the program United for Ukraine, or known as U4U. I will pass the microphone to Oleksandr Kostenko to continue his presentation.
Thank you, Valentyna, and hi, everyone. And as you can see, currently, according to the UN agency's reports, there have been more than 8 million of the refugees from Ukraine recorded across Europe, with most Ukrainians fled to neighboring countries. We do have Poland and Germany hosting the largest share. While some Ukrainian refugees have sought resettlement to the third country, many have decided to stay close to home, waiting to return to Ukraine. And indeed, as you can see, in the last 12 months, the number of internally displaced persons has been reduced from 6.5 to 5.3 million, with families returning home for a variety of reasons. Though the initial EU temporary protection program has been prolonged till March 2024, the ongoing conflict keeps creating pressure on host countries and local authorities to provide long-term humanitarian assistance. And as Ukrainians keeps integrating in the first asylum countries, they have been encountered overwhelmed housing and labor markets, as well as limited capacities for education and social services. Finally, almost 90% of displaced Ukrainian cases are women, children, and people over the age of 60, as men between 18 and 60 generally are not allowed to leave Ukraine due to martial law, with some exceptions. Valentyna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Oleksandr. Let's talk more about two pathways to resettlement for Ukrainians. The first is United for Ukraine. United for Ukraine provide a pathway for Ukrainian citizens and their immediate family member who are outside of the United States of America to come to the United States and stay temporarily for a 2-year period parole. Ukrainians who participate in United for Ukraine must have a supporter in the United States who agree to provide them with financial support for the duration of their stay in the United States. The second option is Lautenberg program. The Lautenberg program is family reunification program that allows current individuals legally residing in the United States to bring their family members to the US through the US Refugee Admission Program. The U.S. Refugee Admission Program is managed by the Bureau of Population, Refugees, Migration, known as a PRM, to be referred to the United States for resettlement. A refugee unable or unwilling to return to country of their origin because of well-founded fear of persecution. The Lautenberg Amendment was first enacted in 1990 to facilitate the resettlement for Jews from the former Soviet Union. Today, the Lautenberg program also includes other persecuted religious minorities, including evangelical Christians, Jehovah's Witness, Ukrainian Greek Catholic, and member of the Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church. To access this program, you must apply through the local resettlement agency. Oleksandr, I will invite you to continue with the next slide.
Thank you so much, and we will be talking about language and identity. And historically, Ukraine has been a bilingual country where both Ukrainian and Russian are commonly spoken and widely understood. Ukrainian is the official language and is considered the first language for 67% of the population, while 30% speak Russian as a first language. The use of Ukrainian is more prevalent in Western and Central parts, while Russian is more dominant in Eastern and Southern Ukraine. There are also other languages spoken in Ukraine, including but not limited to Hungarian, Romanian, and Polish. However, there is one point to underline here, that with the full-scale invasion, the language identity gained new importance for many Ukrainians, as the Ukrainian language started symbolizing Ukrainian national identity and cultural heritage. So indeed, many Ukrainian families have moved from Russian to Ukrainian in their daily communication. That being said, it's important to confirm the language needs of the case and ensure appropriate interpretation for the Ukrainian cases coming from different regions. For instance, please consider translating the resources or available materials in Ukrainian first and then offer Russian translation as an optional choice, because such respecting language and identity sensitivities might contribute to establishing safe space and foster further communication and relationship with the Ukrainian families. When it comes to English, it is included in the Ukrainian curriculum, and many school-aged children at least may have a basic understanding of English. However, most of the newcomers may struggle with the way English is spoken and taught in the US schools. Rob, please move to the next slide. As you might know, Ukrainians come from a society with a deep-rooted traditional views on identity roles, family dynamics, and religious and social norms. Ukrainian refugees may have difficulties interacting with people from different ethnic or racial backgrounds. For instance, homophobic and transphobic perceptions still exist, especially in rural areas. Individuals may not know how to engage in a culturally sensitive manner or even be resistant to collaborate with the representative of LGBTQI+ community. Individuals may also not know how to participate, or they don't want to participate in certain events or holidays which are unfamiliar for them, like Halloween party. So please encourage the clients to share their concerns and share their expectations related to differences in social and cultural norms in the US. Also try to involve every family member in such conversation and conduct an open discussion. And please consider dedicating time to explaining basic US laws and norms, including but not limited to inclusion and diversity, communication styles, etc. If applicable, consider engaging members of the Ukrainian community to help providing interpretation and the general orientation, such as new community, transportation, nearby facilities, public services, because since February 2022, Ukrainian diasporas have gained more important central role of communicating and supporting their placed connationals. When it comes to elderly clients, they may seek complete dependency on their relatives or the local Ukrainian community upon arrival, especially when it comes to the way that they are lacking English language skills. So this could inevitably hinder their integration to the day-to-day interactions, and conversely, children may adapt to the new environment more quickly. Obviously, urge individuals to learn English and build relationship with Ukrainian community members and those outside the community. And please do not forget to promote the Resettlement Agency as a trusted member to address and cope with possible challenges that may arise during the initial stage of their resettlement. Valentyna, over to you.
Thank you so much, Oleksandr. Given the general case composition of women with minor children, employing Ukrainian clients will present opportunities and challenges. Many individuals coming to the US will have attended post-secondary education and have previous work experience. Others may have childcare and language barriers, little to no work experience, or unrecognized qualification. Let's talk a little bit more about tips how to work with Ukrainians. Firstly, provide realistic information about employment, including information when they will receive employment authorization documentation, help them to find work, explain the importance of paying taxes, and explain to them that first job most likely will not be their chosen occupation. underlined the importance and benefits of early formal employment in relation to temporary assistance and future financial self-sufficiency. Highlight that learning English is crucial for future job growth and overall integration in the new society. Current Ukrainians who are parolee are eligible for employment before receiving their work authorization documents, known as EAD, within 90 days as specified by USCIS. Still, many employers have been wary of employing Ukrainian before receiving the EAD or social security numbers. So it's very important to work on individual level with business owners, with employers to help them understand the new hires right. Resettlement professionals are also seeing a lot of women interested in cosmetology and training programs to get back in their career field. So this career path worth exploring in workways. Let's continue to talk a little bit more about education. Oleksandr mentioned a few things about language, but I want to talk a little bit more that primary education in Ukraine is free of charge and compulsory until grade 12. Once person completed primary education, they can continue with vocational or higher educational programs. Many school-aged kids at least have a basic understanding of English, but please make sure that you giving more attention to the kids as speak English in US schools can be like absolutely different for them and can create a lot of challenges for newcomers. When you work with Ukrainians, it's important to explain to parents the value of actively participating in their kids' education, including school activities and parent-teacher interactions. As well, how to manage expectations regarding access and availability of preschool for families with small kids, including possibility with public assistance programs. Be prepared to answer questions about higher education, including cost and language requirements, and evaluation of diplomas or vocational certificates obtained in Ukraine. Because of the high level of single mother being resettled from this population, childcare can be a large barrier to employment and should be considered for placement and employment. Rob, can we move to the next slide, please? Let's talk a little bit more about health and wellness. Ukrainians mostly will not be familiar with the medical insurance system, and they will need to understand how the referral system work when they need to go to the specialist, and the requirement of prescription from a doctor when they go into the pharmacy. Additionally, vaccination might be a sensitive topic to discuss. Some cases might push back on vaccination due to religion or social beliefs. Similarly, when it comes to mental health, Ukrainians prefer to utilize peer and family support and likely not seek professional care. It is not generally acceptable to discuss mental health or receive care for mental health for Ukrainians. When you work with Ukrainian population, it's very important to explain what is included in the initial health services provided to a refugee or parolee upon their arrival, including dental care. It's important to help manage expectation and review the process in timeline for receiving medical care and referrals in the United States. Highlight the same-day care is not always possible for non-urgent cases. As well, it's important to clarify the vaccination rules related to immigration status and their required vaccination for childcare and school in your particular state. As well, build the trust and carefully discuss the value of addressing mental health. To do this, apply a framework on the importance of overall self-care and well-being. Herb, can we move please to the next slide? And I saw that many of you mentioned that you're interested to learn a little bit more about housing. So we will talk a little bit about the housing as well. So firstly, almost 70% of Ukrainian population lives in city in 1 or 2 bedroom apartments. More of the housing in the country is privately owned. Renting initial housing in the United States might be a challenge for Ukrainian refugees and parolee. Individuals may not understand the complex leasing process, including the background check, lease requirements, and tenant rights and responsibilities. It is also possible that they will have a higher expectation for their living condition that available for them upon their arrivals. Ukrainian refugees and parolee may also prefer to live closer to their relatives or their community. When you work with housing with Ukrainians, it's really very important to dedicate the time to explain leasing agreement in detail. Specifically explain condition related to repair and maintenance responsibility, as a lot of Ukrainian will tend to make minor repairs themselves. Additionally, truly explain the concept of security deposit and lease duration. If possible or necessary, please consider translation for the lease agreement. Review different expenses and the importance of timely payments as term and rental and utility payments, because in Ukraine it can be based on the verbal agreement sometimes, and very often they're not using the written lease agreements. Review and the general use of appliances and utilities. And for example, plumbing system in Ukraine is absolutely different than in US. So it's important for them to understand and explain the consequences and penalties of terminating lease earlier, as families might consider looking for cheaper or better renting options after initial housing, and it can happen like in the shorter term. Suggest caseworkers review housing rights and how to reach out to make fair housing claim, or has as well heard that a lot of Ukrainians facing the barriers like this in the big cities like New York, I believe so in our area in Seattle as well, we have a lot of challenges in this. So refer the links and other resources online for fair housing claim that it can be helpful for them. Thank you so much, Rob. I'm passing the mic to you.
Apologies all for that. We're now going to move on to our second objective for today, where we discuss resources for supporting Ukrainians, and these will be resources geared towards providers as well as Ukrainians themselves. I would like to welcome Regan to discuss this, as she'll be representing CORE.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again so much for joining today. It's amazing to see you all here. Your presence here on the session just indicates your care for our clients, and that is incredibly meaningful. So I'm going to spend some time, as Rob mentioned, talking about our resources. But first, we're going to bring it back to Slido, and we are going to answer this question. What kinds of resources have you found useful in your work with Ukrainian clients? So go ahead, pull back out your smartphone or device, and we can start talking through some of these responses. So I see interpreter services. It looks like there are also some resources on USA Hello, Catholic Charities. Yeah, this is great. I even see Core Backgrounder, which is amazing. So this isn't incredibly new information for you, but you're already on such a good track. I also see, let's see, community connections are incredibly important. Food banks, other staff, resettlement staff. Switchboard, amazing. Terjimly for free interpretation. So it looks like so far interpretation and translation services have been the most helpful. Amazing. Also a lot of resources on ESL. I hope this gives you a good picture on all of the different resources that are available. I'm sure each of you are leaning on your local resettlement agency as well as your national resettlement agency. and other technical assistance programs that are out there. Awesome. So to give you another look around what we do at the Cultural Orientation Resource Exchange, or CORE, I'll share a little bit about us as well as the resources that we have available. So CORE is a technical assistance program that connects and supports refugee resettlement staff globally to deliver effective cultural orientation. We also call cultural orientation CO. So I'll refer to cultural orientation as CO for the rest of this session. But that helps refugees and special immigrant visa holders achieve self-sufficiency in the United States. CORE works with providers to help boost their skills, increase their knowledge, to ensure that the CO they provide to newcomers is better coordinated, more consistent, and higher quality. So there are a number of resources available, as I mentioned, on our website that's important to be aware of. And these are both focused for you as providers, and it's also important for you to be aware of the newcomer-facing resources that we have. So for providers, CORE offers self-paced online courses and webinars to help resettlement staff around the world deliver effective CO. These are free to access courses and webinars, and they cover a range of topics and concepts, including the refugee resettlement journey, working with interpreters, applying adult learning methodologies, and teaching specific CO topics, as well as guidance on integrating digital technology. So there's so much there for new providers, for more experienced providers. Even if you're not delivering cultural orientation, I still think that we have tons of resources available that could be helpful for your learning and awareness of the resettlement process. So under the Teach section of our website, you will also find the information you need to know about teaching cultural orientation. So under this section is where you'll find what we call the Cultural Orientation Objectives and Indicators, or ONIs. And those outline what is required in cultural orientation programming. So the ONIs support a continuum of consistent messaging for refugees about life in the US, as well as help guide the planning and delivery of CO sessions. So the ONIs is great because if you're wondering, well, what actually is covered in cultural orientation, or what specifically do newcomers need to know about housing? All of that information will be available to you there. So we also have CO curriculum and an activity bank. And something that's really great about the activity bank is the activities are organized by topic, and you can use and modify them based off of literacy and digital literacy levels. So those are available to you with a number of different tracks of how to modify it to best meet the needs of your clients. We also have a lot of how-to guides and other resources about if you are working one-on-one with a client versus if you are communicating with a group of clients and how to navigate that. And finally, if you're a community volunteer or you're working with community volunteers, you can go to our provider onboarding page. So we have a toolkit there that sponsors can pick and choose activities with guidelines on how to teach them. And there are also self-reflection activities to do with sponsors or for them to do on their own to build cultural humility when working with newcomers, which is incredibly important. So that's an overview of CORE's provider-facing resources, and CORE also has numerous newcomer-facing resources for those learning how to navigate life in the US. So as a provider, your awareness of these resources is very important. So CORE hosts our newcomer-facing resources on what we call Settle In. So Settle In is a multi-platform digital information source for newcomers resettling in the US. Settle In is designed for newcomers. It combats misinformation, promotes self-exploration, and is user-centered. Under the Settle In umbrella, there are 3 digital properties. So we have a website, a mobile app, and a Facebook page. These properties are designed to be accessed by newcomers throughout the resettlement process. All resources prioritize visual clarity as well as low literacy and low digital literacy needs. All topics covered in these properties are directly related to the O and I's that I introduced earlier. And in order for newcomers to gain mastery over these topics. So there's an extensive vetting process to ensure that these resources uphold consistent messaging about life in the US and put learning in the hands of newcomers. So I'll walk through briefly each of these 3 properties. So the Settle In website can be accessed on the bottom of CORE's website. We have the link here for you so you can access it there. It's now available in 12 languages, including Ukrainian and Russian. So you're immediately prompted to select your preferred language. And there's hundreds of resources, including videos, podcasts, fact sheets, topics, similar to cultural adjustment, employment, housing. And this website contains information that doesn't change very often. So it's pretty evergreen in terms of the content. And through the website, you'll also find what we call the Help Center. And there is where we publish more in-depth and timely articles with information that might change over time. You can also find resources specific to Ukrainian humanitarian parolees through the topics listed. So you can search for them in the search bar. So then we have the Settle In mobile app, which is an interactive learning app that provides short video. It can be downloaded on Apple Store and Google Play. And something to note is that it is now available in Ukrainian as well as Russian. For a while, we had just it available on in Russian. So then we have our Settle In Facebook page. So over a year ago, when the Afghan evacuation started, Settle In started a Facebook page for Afghans. And so this provided information in Dari and Pashto, and that experience was so valuable for us, and we were able to replicate that project for Ukrainians when the war started in Ukraine. So this is where Ukrainian newcomers can be helped navigate life in the US. Our goal is to provide accurate and up-to-date information in language support and refer users to lawful service providers. So you'll see a ton of posts on a variety of topics. And something else to note is that we regularly host Facebook Live events, providing information on resettlement and life in the US. So you'll be able to find all of the archived live events that we've done by accessing videos on the Facebook page. And in mid-July, we'll be hosting a live event about emotional well-being, which is important to be on the lookout for. And so, yeah, there's a number of ways that you can reach out to the Settle In team. They're amazing. I totally recommend reaching out if you have a question or if your client has a question. We have 2 full-time digital community liaisons specifically that are focused just on supporting newcomers. So I encourage you to share these with clients. We have resources on our website to share with clients, like the page, all of the things. But I think that all of this is really, really valuable. And thank you again so much for attending this session. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, Regan, before we actually move on to our next objective, we had a clarifying question from someone. They asked, isn't Settle In written for refugees? We were concerned about it causing confusion with parolees. So anything to respond in terms of audience and voice?
Yeah, we have information specific to Ukrainian humanitarian parolees, and a lot of the information is going to be general outside of that, focused on refugees. But it's important to think about the specifics in what specifically you're trying to teach. And if there are questions on those nuances, you can reach out to the Settle In team. But it's geared towards newcomers who are classified within the refugee as refugee, but again, like our Facebook page, both for Afghans and for Ukrainians, all of that is specific to Ukrainian humanitarian parolees or Afghan parolees.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We hope that that answers the question from the chat. One more clarifying question. Do the Settle In Facebook videos come in English as well as Ukrainian? We wanted to share some resources to clients at our health department, but my supervisor asked for an English version, so we knew what they said.
That's a great question. Yes, they do come in English, which is wonderful. So not only for the Facebook videos will it be in English, Ukrainian, and Russian, but also on our Facebook or on the Settle In website, all of the information is also available in English. So anything that's on there you can see in English and then in language.
Wonderful. Thank you, Regan. Those of you who continue to have questions about Settle In or any of CORE's other resources, please feel free to continue dropping those in the chat or reach out to CORE and Settle In the ways that we will provide following this webinar. Thank you so much, Regan.
Thank you.
We're now going to move on to our Q&A portion of today's session. So we're really happy to be dedicating so much of our time to today's session to engage with our subject matter experts who are working in this field, many of whom with lived experience. So just as a reminder of who is in the room that we'll be working with, we have Regan, Oleksandr, Valentyna, and Mariana. Please review their job titles briefly, but just to give you an idea, I have a list of prepared questions that I'll be directing to a few of maybe 2 or 3 of these panelists at a time. They'll answer those. And then once we have completed those prepared questions, again, we will move on to questions from the Q&A box. If we have not answered your question as of yet, it's because we are either saving it for later for that participant Q&A portion, or we'll be answering it with a written response. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see our panelists' faces a little bit better. And we're going to move to our first prepared question for today. So this is a question for Oleksandr and Regan. The question is, what does cultural orientation look like for Ukrainians before they arrive to the United States? What may need to be addressed more deeply? And what is most important for service providers to be aware of for new Ukrainian arrivals?
Thank you, Rob. I will take the first part of this question, and actually, I would divide the pre-arrival cultural orientation into 2 main aspects, like formal and informal one. The formal one is more related to the Lautenberg program clients, as there are dedicated cultural orientation sessions provided by the trainers from the Eurasia, which are covering basic objectives and indicators for such topics as traveling to the US, overview of the initial resettlement, employment and education, housing, benefits, cultural adjustment. It also includes some scenario-based discussions and questions and answers time. The second cultural orientation, an informal one, and thanks for the question from one of the participants, is indeed based on that self-preparation and independent search of information. So it's common to find dedicated channels or chats in messengers, communities in social media, YouTube or TikTok channels where the clients are trying to get or even share their experience. So obviously by the end of the day, it creates some kind of double-edged sword situation. It could boost their confidence and knowledge before arrival, but it also where the controversial data might be easily spread. One of the most common examples from my previous cultural orientation life, that refugees were waiting for the specific benefits which were not relevant to their states where they were relocating. So from my perspective, I would recommend to double check the expectations of the clients. If those expectations or, let's say, benefits they are expecting, they are really relevant for the state or for the location they are working there. We were also relying on the official resources so that Ukrainian clients were building more trust to see what is the final resource from which we were trying to get our information. When it comes with the engagement with the Ukrainian community, I would recommend to have this clear split of responsibilities and expectations on who are doing what. So basically, it's a challenge, but it's also able to just provide a clear exploration that the resettlement agency is working closely with the official bodies, and it possesses the ultimate information related to the initial resettlement services. And I believe, Regan, you can also add your own points, and other panelists, please feel free to contribute to my answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Oleksandr. I really, really agree with the thought about setting realistic expectations. I think that's important in all aspects of working with newcomers, but especially with this population. I think it's important to be able to stress right in the beginning, okay, these are the issues we're seeing. These are the areas in which you're going to expect, you can probably expect delays. these are the frustrations that you will likely be having. But these are the steps that we can take, and these are the active steps that that will be taken in order to ensure your safety and resettlement process. So that's one thing that I would say. I also would say that ensure that you are informed. Review as much as you can the Ukrainian background or other resources that you found helpful about correct and up-to-date information. That's going to help you build trust ultimately with your clients. I think making sure that you have up-to-date historical and cultural information, especially with the backgrounder. Core also has all of those things about each topic that might go over, that you might go over, all the tips and considerations to think about specifically for the Ukrainian population. So I would review all of those as well. And I think ultimately that's going to, as I said, help you build lasting trust with your client. So those are the things that I would add, but I paused there to see if anyone else has anything else.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Valentyna.
If you don't mind, I just want to clarify or remind that actually parolee, they didn't get the cultural orientation upon their arrival, before their arrival, and mostly they do not get that officially through any agency. So whenever you work with the parolee, it's important to talk about their specific status and know that most likely they do not use the same level of information and knowledge than refugees before coming to US. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Valentyna. I'm hearing a lot of themes of, checking expectations and being clear about those, and also assessing folks, like what folks are coming in with. Not only in terms of expectations, but in terms of prior exposure to the services being provided, right? So thank you to those for answering that question. We're going to move to our next prepared question, and this one is going to be directed primarily towards Valentyna and Mariana. So for our panelists who immigrated to the US from Ukraine, what were some of the biggest adjustments you had to make in terms of cultural differences when transitioning to the American work environment? How did you navigate those adjustments?
Thank you so much, Rob. It's a really great question. And I want to share a little bit personal experience. Like for me personally, the first challenge was the language. I do understand that everyone can say that it's obvious as you move to the new country and you need to speak the language in this country, but it's more not about just language, but language acceptance and the way how people talk to each other. Some phrases that can be usual for you, it's most likely not usual to people who came to the new country. For example, when I came to United States of America, I think the most confusing word for me been gotcha. And whenever I hear that again and again, I was like, what are they talking about? And one day I decided to go over the shame and go and ask my coworker what does mean. And I've been surprised what does mean. So just keep in mind, whenever you talk to other people, they very regular slang or like conversations or phrases can be very unusual to people that you work with. Second, it's understanding of the benefits of the work and the tax deduction, insurance, how the PTO works. I feel like it's worked so different in every organization, but it's necessary to explain to people and help them. And the system, hiring system in Ukraine is absolutely different. So for me, it's been a big challenge to work with my first resume. It's been like very confusing, very challenging. And I was like, why I need to do that, how to navigate that. So whenever you work with Ukrainians, really dedicate a time to sit and patiently help them with the resume, with the main points, with objective, with the all their details, and try to clarify. For example, volunteer work, it's not very important in Ukraine when we go to work, but it's really great benefits when we're talking about the jobs in US, and it can show the skills and abilities of the person. So this all small things really have a big meaning. So thank you so much. And Mariana, I will be happy to hear your experience too.
Thank you, Valentyna. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for inviting me today. Wishing you to have a great day. So being Ukrainian and recent immigrant myself, and speaking about my experience of adapting to American work environment, I should mention that some aspects are similar for example, behavior and etiquette at the workplace. But in terms of health, life insurances, which are not widely used in Ukraine, one can say that we just need to get the right information and become educated about this. I agree with Valentyna about all about mentioned, and I would like to add that the first thing to do in terms of adjustments to like cultural differences when transitioning to American environment, we need to speak about the like emotional state, like emotional support from family, friends, new colleagues and co-workers. It's very important, and it was, speaking about my experience, it was very important for me. And at my workplace, I received all my co-workers are very responsive, give great advice and essential information. I also agree with you, Valentyna, about the American-style resume, also the interviews with employers online, the job interviews with 3 or more interviewers, yes, which could be challenging sometimes because we didn't used to do this in Ukraine. And also offer letters and documents we need to fill and sign as the first steps of employment. So what else I can add? That another aspect which is maybe not very important, but we need to be aware about that about employment process that more than a year and a half there have not been any public holidays in Ukraine because of the war, and people who recently arrived are getting used to working here at the workplace and feel relief when they have some public holidays, and this is kind of recovery and returning to normal life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariana and Valentyna, for those responses. I really appreciate how, some of what you shared touched on these general sort of cultural pieces in terms of familiarity, how people might refer to each other, but also talking about some of these more logistical things that are more, like I said, practical, that are focused on health insurance. What does, team building and camaraderie in the US workforce look like? Things like that. And really want to echo the idea that making sure that a workplace where you might be sending someone to work who's a Ukrainian client of yours, making sure it's a supportive workplace for them and making sure you have really good connections with employers to be able to sort of assess that as well. We're going to move on to our next prepared question. So this is again directed towards Valentyna and Mariana, but Regan and Oleksandr, please feel free to add as well. Are there any specific cultural norms or values in Ukraine that significantly impact the way Ukrainian clients may approach case management or seek assistance? How can service providers promote integration while being mindful of these norms to provide culturally sensitive support?
Thank you so much, Rob. It's a really great question as well. And I will do the answer based on my own experience as the provider and the refugee. First of all, it's necessary to build trustful relationship with Ukrainians. Again, due to the situation in Ukraine right now, it's kind of always questioned, does this person my friend or my enemy? So it's taken time to build a good relationship, and do not be offended when people, when they work with you, they kind of questioning you a lot. It's not because they don't want to trust you, it's just because of their experience, unfortunately, and how things going on in Ukraine. As well, we still need to keep in mind that there's still high level of corruption, and very often the leadership style in Ukraine is still authoritarian, and especially at works. And a lot of the employee look at their manager through the lens of fear than trust. And the same things about the government system and many other places. So in my own experience, when I just started to work in my second place, where to leave, my manager come to me very often and come and ask, how you doing, Miss Ostapets? And I was like, oops, I'm in trouble. Does I completed some task not good? Does there are some mistakes or anything else? So it took a time for me to understand that my manager not seeing something suspicious, but he just coming to me to check that I'm doing great and that I have the level of support that I need to do my work. So it's about the workplace, it's about work with case manager, it's about communication with the government services. So we will question people, and not because Ukrainian is bad or not trustful, it's just because of the experience that we have through the long time in our life. So when you work with Ukrainians, please make sure that you're really hearing their questions and take a time to talk to them. And as the scenes already been mentioned by Oleksandr about the language, I feel from my own experience, many people asking first question, are you Russian? I know that with the shifting and war in Ukraine, it's this question kind of appear less, but still I'm hearing that again and again, are you Russian? Or like when we provide an interpretation, we assuming that Russian is okay. But because of the situation that's happening right now, consider first Ukrainian. Yes, the eastern part of Ukraine may speak primarily Russian language, but still help people to go over all the pain that they still care because of the war, and make sure that you provide appropriate interpretation for people, and always double check what their preferable language, and make sure that you provide interpretation actually, because it's really big stress. And even if person have some level of English, another thing to know about Ukrainians, we in some way proud people, as educator back in Ukraine as well, I can say very often we're looking on the knowledge or something. If I don't know perfectly, I don't know at all, which is not true. If I know, I know. So when people want to talk to you, they can question in not because they don't know, just because they doubting and because the way how they grew up and taught to build the communication. So yeah, I think I will pass to Mariana. I'm more than sure that there are a lot of things to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to mention healthcare. We should say that Ukrainians are the nation that are always concerned about their health or things that are affecting health. So visiting a primary physician or a specialist is different here in the US because in Ukraine, a patient usually signs an agreement with a doctor to receive medical services, and they do not need to have health insurance. And in the US, you need to, when you need to visit a doctor, you need to you should check if a doctor or hospital is in a network for your specific plan. That is why having been assisted, for example, by case manager at the resettlement agency in booking an appointment with a doctor could be very important for Ukrainian clients. It's not only about the language, also about this aspect that people are not educated about this. Thank you. And Oleksandr, if you want to add something.
Thank you, Valentyna. And Mariana, just want to echo your comment about some time management expectations. And please do not take it personally if Ukrainian clients could be resistant or could be impatient waiting for some public services, since that they are simply comparing that with the Ukrainian reality. We do have really, in specific areas, we do have very efficient and effective way of delivering services, including even medical care, documentation, or any other public inquiries which Ukrainians are applying here. So that's all about clear expectations during the first contact with the Ukrainian case, just explaining that here in the US, you might take it more time to receive specific documentation, specific ID, or any other service you need. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Oleksandr. And before we go to our last prepared question, I'm also sort of in this theme, noticing something in our Q&A coming through about, in addition to health services, since we're talking about that, what about mental health services? So could any of you speak briefly on, how Ukrainians may feel about mental health and counseling, what that may look like in Ukraine versus the United States, how discussions from caseworkers with Ukrainian clients about mental health should proceed?
If you don't mind, I will jump to answer. As I mentioned earlier in today's presentation, for Ukrainians, it's unusual to talk about their mental health, and in some way it's very shameful to talk that you have a mental struggle. So it's why necessary to remember whenever you raise the topic of mental health, most likely people will be embarrassed and will close themselves other than like open and openly talk about their problems. A lot of if we're talking about the Lautenberg program, the people coming, it's most likely will be evangelical Christians and other the religious minorities, that will prefer to talk to the priests, to pastors, to utilize the churches. So I can suggest that one of the first, of course, conversation with the church leaders and using the church as one of the resources for supporting for mental health. As I mentioned earlier, build trustful relationship. And when people will trust you fully, then they can speak up about their problems and race. And when you have a trustful relationship, people can be open to accept the support and see the new things. Unfortunately, we seen some numbers of the suicide in the Slavic community, and it's not hidden, it's like true, it's exists, and mental health, and especially with the war in Ukraine, it's raising the mental health issues. But be very sensitive when you're talking about that, and utilize the Ukrainian community, utilize the mental health providers that speak Ukrainian or at least Russian language, that they will be able to talk and maybe present that not just like mental health issues conversation, rather than just support, not putting so much about problems, but rather talk about the possible support and advices and help. Thank you.
All right, I appreciate especially that community integration approach and community engagement piece of working with folks that Ukrainians may feel more comfortable working with. Oleksandr, did you have something to add to that?
Just one more specific comment to what Valentyna has mentioned, that the mental health issue are specifically visible for those cases coming from the rural areas, because they completely do not use that service. And talking about as being Ukrainian, living in Ukraine now in the urban area, I would say that we have a positive trend to promote it widely and publicly, those opportunities for the hotlines, for the free mental health, for the veteran reintegration, family reunion. So, I mean, there are trends and there are steps to promote the mental health programs nationwide. Thank you.
All right, thank you guys for answering that. And we're going to move to our last prepared question. Before we do that, just a reminder to my panelists, of course, if you see any questions in the Q&A box that you can knock out really quickly, feel free. That'll be our next section. But this last question will be directed towards Regan and Valentyna and Mariana if they have anything to add as well. That question is, what kinds of challenges are you seeing service providers encountering in working with Ukrainian clients, and what have been some best practices in addressing those issues?
I definitely have some thoughts on that second part of the question, but I'll pause first, see if anyone wants to answer the first part.
Yeah, Valentyna or Mariana, any of the challenges that you're seeing providers encountering with Ukrainian clients that you want to talk on?
Sure.
Yes. Oh.
Go ahead, Mariana.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I also seen the similar question in the Q&A box, and this was about the work opportunities, and when people are not ready to work and they're waiting for benefits. So the best way is to educate people about that, to provide special trainings with useful information about job search, about interview process, to prepare them for the interview, to help them prepare for the interview, to give advice on their resume. It could be great for the motivation to work here in the United States.
Yeah, I know that can be really difficult, especially given the temporary nature of the status and sort of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and Russia. So I know that, even before we get to those sort of protocol things, can be really tough as a caseworker working with a Ukrainian client, being like, well, you got to work, where a Ukrainian client might be like, there are all these benefits and I don't know how long I'm going to be here. That uncertainty can be really challenging. Valentyna, anything to add on that before we move to Regan's response?
Sure. One of the big things is the high expectation. Let's be honest, high expectation about services, benefits, about first job, about the medical system. When people here in America, they expect the excellent services in all, and whenever we connect them with PCP or getting the referral to the specialist, it's took forever to get the appointment with allergy doctor, 6-7 months that they're not ready to wait. So very often they think that their caseworker not providing or case manager not providing the excellent services and refer them to the not right providers, which is not true. It's just the specific of the system. So it's really very important to highlight and talk about these things at the beginning. I mentioned earlier the housing, the expectation for the housing, what type of the housing they can expect upon their arrival, and what the type of the first job they can get. And other things that I can say, it's necessary as well as the service provider to remember that there are a lot of trauma that very often unrecognized to themselves. So there can be the way how they asking or approaching you can be challenged. So always make sure that you direct question. And one of the things that I'm usually use the technique when I'm talking with my clients to give the question back to understand what exactly they want to ask. Because very often when they said like, where is my check? They're not so much worried about check. They want to make sure that you deliver services on time and they're not in a trouble. They're more worried that they will have a penalty because they don't get something on time. So just make sure that you clarify as much as possible when you're working with Ukrainian clients. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentyna. Regan, anything to answer that back half of the question? What have been some best practices in addressing those issues?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with all of that's already been said. One thing that I would just add is, like Valentyna had mentioned, is recognizing the deep loss that clients are experiencing. If you think about it, a part of them has died. The old way that their life has died. So I think always keeping that trauma-informed piece at the forefront of your interactions with them is really important. I also think that many resettlement staff right now are getting fielded with questions that they might not know how to answer, specifically about the future, what's going to happen. All of this navigating uncertainty is something that comes up again and again and again. And I think if you aren't prepared to be able to navigate uncertainty with your client, that could be a big challenge for you. What I would recommend about that is being really comfortable with saying, I don't know, and we don't know. Again and again, I think if you get questions that you don't know how to answer, being really real and clear about what the future might hold. And this again goes with like setting realistic expectations as well. But I think the more that you can get comfortable saying, I don't know, this is what it looks like right now, and this is what's going to happen right now, and this is how I'm going to be able to support you in these ways right now. So just grounding yourself and your client in the present moment, I think, are going to be helpful strategies. Another thing I would add, I can drop the link into the chat, but I'm going to be leading a webinar next Wednesday, specifically about strengths-based strategies that folks can use within cultural orientation. And this is going to be geared for preferred communities providers, but I would say anyone who is a provider and working with Ukrainians, I'd welcome you to attend this webinar. And this is also just going to be talking about strategies that, instead of focusing on the deficits of your clients or the things that they might need help with, really being able to boost and promote their strengths. So I'll drop that in the chat, but thanks. And any other comments, feel free to add them.
Yeah, thanks so much, Regan. Valentyna, go ahead.
I'll apologize. So another thing that I want to add is childcare. It's a really big challenge, especially when we're talking about the finding the job and knowing the rules of raising the kids and the discipline understanding in US. And another big thing that I'm seeing, that we have a challenge that people don't know, that they cannot leave their kids on their own at home, and that is a big struggle. So make sure that you address the childcare question, the discipline, and all the norms that about the school and communication with schools, because it's going to be really different in Ukraine, and it's going to be a really very challenging in understanding that you cannot leave your kid at home when you're going to work. You need to have somebody who provides childcare for your kid before you establish or find a job. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Valentyna. And that does address one of the questions we had in the Q&A box, so I marked that one. We're going to move. We have just a couple more minutes for some questions. But one of the themes that I'm seeing throughout has to do with this idea of sort of job matching and recertification. So for example, if someone wanted a certification as a manicurist or was a practicing lawyer when they were home in Ukraine and now cannot be credentialed in the same ways, what would you all recommend in terms of navigating those sorts of employment processes with those sorts of clients, particularly perhaps maybe asking Mariana and Valentyna as folks who are working really actively in a client-facing role? How do you guys navigate those situations? What are some resources that are helpful for making sure that folks are receiving dignified and equitable labor opportunities?
Thank you. So sometimes this could be a tough question for Ukrainians, especially when they were specialists there in Ukraine back then in Ukraine, but and they would like to continue their career here. So a good idea in this case could be offering the client like entry-level job while working on evaluation and the credentials, while receiving certifications, while doing the course or classes, and just not to, spend time and just to earn some money during the process of obtaining better employment. So this could be a good idea for the clients who are looking for better opportunities, not only entry-level job, but intermediate or higher-level jobs in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Starting with an entry-level job that's relevant, but then also creating a really clear plan for, all right, how are we going to get you from here to where you want to be? So being really clear about that. And I do want to plug opportunities like the World Education Services Organization does some re-credentialing work. Upwardly Global does some work on this as well. So there are some resources out there. If you're looking for more, please do reach out to Switchboard and we can connect you with those sorts of things. All right, Valentyna, anything to add to that, or shall we move on to another question?
Just quickly, again, most of the local agencies have the employment programs. So definitely make sure that they connected with employment services and getting the support, because it's really one of the greatest opportunities. For example, in our office, we have employment team and we have the job classes where people who have the similar experience share their own experience and encourage people that it's not big lose. Yeah, it's hard, and they share the story. So like, do they as much as possible connect them with resources, with community colleges, because they can have like special programs as well that can be helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for adding to that. Any other themes that you all are seeing in the Q&A box that you guys would like to sort of speak out on as well? We are close to time, I think. What I can say is the questions for serving Ukrainian clients are many, and we do have the answers, but we unfortunately are low on time. So what I do want to say is that I want to say thank you so much for the questions that you did provide. For those that we haven't been able to get to, we are going to save these and we'll do what we can to respond to these. If you have questions that have come up that have been bigger, that might lead to a desire for more training and technical assistance for you or for your team, please reach out to Switchboard. We would be happy to talk to you more about that. We may be able to partner with any of these lovely subject matter experts that we have on the call, or more broadly with the Cultural Orientation Resource Exchange as well. So I do want to close out our Q&A portion for today. I want to say thank you so much again to our panelists for all that they have provided by way of their work and their expertise and their experiences that they've shared. We're going to move to closing out our session for today. So first and foremost, I want to ask for your help as a participant of a Switchboard learning opportunity. If you could please take a moment to get out your smartphone and scan this QR code, or you can fill out the link at the in the chat for providing feedback for today's learning opportunity. Our feedback surveys are taken very seriously. We read through them really closely to ensure that we're continuing to provide high quality and responsive technical assistance. So please, like I said, take 30 seconds just to fill it out. It's just 3 questions. We'll also be sending this out along with our additional resources and our recording and transcripts for today's session. Just want to review our learning objectives ever so briefly. We hope by now you're able to, like we said, go through that list of cultural and practical considerations that can be found in CORE's Ukrainian Backgrounder, that you have identified some practical resources to be used by service providers and Ukrainian clients alike, and that you can apply some of the answers that we provided during the Q&A discussion to some of your own work to better to enhance the resettlement experience for Ukrainians. We've got quite a list of recommended resources, and for those of you who are checking in the Q&A box about if these will be shared with you later on, yes, we will be sending a PDF document full of these resources and many of the others that we've dropped in the chat. We hope that you will continue wanting to learn and dig deeper into serving your Ukrainian clients better. We hope that this session has led to that for you as well. I'm going to drop some of these in the chat for anyone who's really itching to get at these really quickly. But like I said, do be expecting these in a PDF document that we will be sending out tomorrow. And last but not least, we ask that you please stay connected with Switchboard. We are here for you all as newcomer service providers. You can check out our website, switchboardta.org, and access any of the over 1,000 learning resources we have in our resource library. If you, like I said, want to engage deeper with any of the topics that we've discussed on with your team or with your organization at large, you can reach out to us and request technical assistance that we offer for free to ORR-funded providers. So if you're unsure if you're ORR funded or unsure if your team is eligible for technical assistance, just reach out. You can email us at switchboard@rescue.org, or you can submit a technical assistance request through our website. Again, that's switchboardta.org. Follow us on social media, tell your friends, and we hope to see you at our next learning opportunity. Take care. Have a great day.